Hey, my name is Vandana. May I know who is this unknown user? Hello? It seems somebody just joined this meeting. Can you please specify your name?
Yes, this is Adrian Poindexter. I can put it in the chat.
Okay, sounds good.
I may have to log off and log back on.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Vandana, and I am your instructor for today's class on risk, quality, and integrate plan. So it seems someone else is in the lobby. Okay, so today's lesson, we will be starting with very first topic is a risk. So what is a risk? So a risk basically can be any event or conditions that may have a positive or negative impact on any of the project objectives. And it may or may not have an effect on in my sense, like four most important things in a project, which is project scope, schedule, cost, and qualities. So rather than being reactive to risk, what PMP suggests is that we can be prepared with the strategies, a toolkit of possible responses, and a growth mindset to be proactive about our risk plan. Give me 1 second. This is anyway. So why- give me 1 second. I'm just trying to understand why this is not shown or format. Let's move down. Okay, so this slide was about the risk assessment. So risk assessment basically openly starts very early in the project, and early in the sense that the risks that are identified in a business case and on the project charter. But yes, we have to always keep in mind that the risks to the project can pop up from anywhere at any time. So risk originates from wide range of unknown known issues that could be internal or external to our business environment. Risk development is indicated by a trigger conditions. We are going to go over those. Risk can be positive, That means they could be an opportunities, or it could be negative, that they could be a threat. And if risk becomes an issue, we have to act on that. So here we have the trigger conditions, which is an event or a situation that indicates that a risk is about to occur. Opportunity is a risk that, if developed, would create a positive effect on one or more positive objectives. Threat is a risk that would have a negative effect on one or more project objectives. Issue is a current condition or a situation that may have an impact on the project objectives. And there are generally like different type of risk, like a pure risk and a business risk. Pure risk is something that opportunity only for the loss, and the business risk is opportunity for a gain or a loss. Well, let's have a look at, like, these are the list of the project risk identified by the project managers. Those could be while working with the new vendors and building processes, supply chain issues for the correct brick, building code compliance, key stakeholder conflicts, or a retail market change, decline of in-store shopping, site surveys shows risk of slippage from erosion less than 25 years. So these are the just examples of what the risk could be. Okay, so this slide is about a project risk management. So project risk management, of course, maximize the probability of positive events and minimize the probabilities or the consequences of on the negative events. So if I give you an example, let's say a key supplier going out of a business is a risk, or a maybe key member leaving your organizations. So they are the project risk. And those risks are handled in different ways in a different projects uh, planning. So like predictive project planning, I'm sure you all have read about, and adaptive project planning. So in predictive project planning, the risks are oftenly identified, assessed, and planned upfront. The project is viewed as a linear sequence of events, and changes are basically not happen, or changes are not expected to happen very frequently. So therefore, a detailed risk management plan is created at the beginning of the project, and with the risk monitor, control processes, and everything. Whereas in adaptive project planning, the risk handling is different because it is associated with the agile methodologies, where they embrace change and uncertainties. So in this approach, what happens? Risks are handled in a more flexible and iterative manners. Risks are handled as they come. So instead of trying to identify all the risk upfront, the risks are continuously identified in the whole process in the project life cycles. They are assessed and managed throughout the project in a each iteration or sprint. Excuse me. What else can I tell you is a risk response strategies are frequently updated based on a new information or change in the project. So in conclusion, I would say while both predictive and adaptive projects planning handles risk, they do it in a different way. Predictive planning tries to anticipate and plan for the risk upfront, whereas adaptive planning, they embrace the change and handles the risk in a more flexible way, in a manner where it comes, they handle it like that. Okay. So create risk strategies. So creating a risk strategy basically involves identifying potential risk that could jeopardize your project or business objectives, and developing the plan to mitigate, avoid, or accept those risks. So I will give you an example of, what is the risk appetite, risk tolerance, or risk thresholds are in a project. because for any company or any project you want to
He
start
just ran
working
over
on.
here and hit me and ran off.
Sorry. Hello. Was there a question for me?
Sorry, I accidentally unmuted myself.
Okay, I was wondering. So let me give you, let me start with a hypothetical example of a tech startup company. So what would be the risk appetite for that company? So risk appetite for that company would be probably high because the tech startup might have a high risk appetite because they seek to innovate and disrupt in an existing market. And the high risk appetite might be reflected the company's willingness to invest in a research and a development, even though they know that they may not yield the profitable return, but they still take the risk. So that is their risk appetite. Risk tolerance is something the degree of uncertainty a company is willing to handle. So for the tech startup might have a high tolerance for, let's say, risk associated with the market competition, but they may have a low tolerance for risk associated with legal compliance, since legal issues can be catastrophic for the small businesses. And then we have a risk threshold. So risk threshold is a specific point at which risk become unacceptable. So if risk crosses this point, action is required. So for a for us relating it to the same example, tax startup might have a risk threshold associated with its burn rate. So if its burn rate exceed the certain level without a corresponding increase in revenue, that's a risk. And they have crossed their risk threshold, and the company needs to take an action to reduce their cost or increase their income. So these all are the like broad concept, definitely, which are there where the specifics will vary greatly depending on the nature of the business, industry, size, and their strategies and many other factors. Okay, so next we have is a risk management plan that also involves identifying the potential risk, assessing their impact, and then planning the strategies to manage them. So these four are the factors that we have to factor in: the size, complexity, importance, and development approach. So if I give you an example, so how does size matter in a risk is, so let's say there is a software company that they're developing a software project is that to develop a software, and there are about 50 people and the timeline is about 18 months. So this is a large scale that increase the potential risk such as communication, scope, creep. So all other such risk related to the large with the sorry related to the substantial size of a project. So to manage this risk, the plan could be strategies like maybe they can have a regular team meetings, they can have a clear documentations or defined project milestones. So how complexity is, so let's say the project involves integrating the application with multiple existing systems. So it also adds in a complexity and this complexity adds a risk of this because the integration may not work as expected. So the risk management plan would include a thorough testing of all those integration, maybe some contingencies plan for potential issues with existing systems. In terms of importance, so let's say this new software is being used by a high profile people in a team, like with the senior management. So importance adds a risk related to performance, security, and reliability. And the management plan might involve like a rigorous quality insurance processes or maybe regular progress reports to the senior management. In terms of development approach is that which development approach that suits best to your project. So it could be agile development project, which can add risk due to its iterative and dynamic nature. There could be change in requirement or issues discovered later in the development cycles. So the risk management plan would probably include regular reviews of product backlog, or maybe they need to have a close collaboration with the stakeholders to manage the changes. So these are how these are important to factor in. And now in the plan, what we need to add is risk strategy. So I'll just give you some example. So risk strategy is something uh, like our strategy is to identify, mitigate, monitor risk like throughout the project life cycle. What is the risk strategy? What is their methodologies? Is it they'll use qualitative or quantitative risk assessment techniques, or maybe they use both? The roles and responsibilities, who would be responsible for those risks? I know the project manager will oversee the overall risk management process, but each team leader will be responsible for identifying and managing risk. Funding, is there a contingency budget of maybe 10, 20, 50% of, I don't know, whatever is been decided, total project cost that needs to be assigned to the unforeseen risk? Uh, Timings, the risk identification assessments, they are like ongoing throughout the project. So formal review needs to be decided that when it will be done. Maybe it needs to be done at major project milestones. Risk categories, what kind of risk categories are these? Is this operational, financial, contractual, environmental, or a legal risk? Stakeholder risk appetite, like we just discussed about risk appetite. What is a stakeholder's risk appetite? Is it low, high, medium? Definition of risk probabilities and impact. We are going to go over those. So risk, you need to decide the risk probability will be assessed on scale to 1 to 5, and while impact is 1 to 5, you assess those. And then you kind of create a matrix with the probability and impact to categorize or prioritize your risk and mitigations. Next we have is a reporting format. Reporting formats will be risk register. Basically, you will have a register which would include details such as risk descriptions, categories, probabilities, and we're gonna go over that format. We have an example of that. Next we have is a tracking document. The risk register will serve as a primary tracking document, and it will update continuously throughout the life cycle of the project. Okay, so next we have is an inherent risk. So inherent risk is a risk that exists in certain environment, and that risk that can be reduced but not completely eliminated through use of controls or preventive measures. So if I give you an example, so let's say there is a business that operate in a field of constructions. So there are several inherent risks associated with the industry, such as worker safety, the potentials for structural failure, compliance. So despite all safety measures and strict procedures, the possibility of accidents or mishaps can never be entirely ruled out, just because due to the nature of the work involved in here. That's what the inherent risk is. On the right side, we have is a Stacy diagram. The purpose of Stacy diagram is to help manager and leaders identify the type of problem that they are dealing with, and which is the most appropriate problem solving approach that they need to use to handle those problems. So x-axis here is about the uncertainty of requirements, and the y-axis is about uncertainty of technologies. So as you can see, the very first block that we have here in green, it's basic or a simple zone. So in this zone, project in this range basically have a clear requirement and they are known solutions. So to succeed in this area, one needs to just establish checklist, procedures, or maybe best practices. They can use traditional management methods and focus on simple tasks and procedures. Next we have is a difficult range. In difficult range, the project in this range have some uncertain requirements and solutions, but they're not as bad. The traditional project management can still work here because not entire project is uncertain, and it does need some requirement, maybe some escalations to the stakeholders or some negotiations are required. But once and I think these are still easy to handle. Next we have is a complex range. So this range has a very it has an unclear criteria and strategies. So for this area, if your project falls in this area, so one should avoid rigid plans as they may not be effective. Instead, they should adopt an agile or maybe iterative approach that breaks the objective into manageable steps. Next, we have is a chaotic zone. So in this zone, definitely requirements and methodologies are unknown and cannot be derived from previous sources. So planning becomes definitely challenging. So embracing an agile methodologies is the perfect solution for this that progress incrementally and gradually transition the project from a complex domain. And I think that's what it is about the Stacy diagram. Next we have is a identification. So risk identification is another crucial part of the risk management process. It also involves recognizing potential risk that could harm an organization operation or ability to meet its objective. So use prompt list to evaluate the external environment for the risk. So prompt list, the aim of the prompt list is to stimulate thinking about where the risk might come from, ensuring a comprehensive approach to risk identifications. So there are different data gathering and analysis that we are going to go over in rest of the slides for the risk identification techniques, risk breakdown structure, brainstorming, nominal group technique, SWOT analysis, affinity diagram, assumptions analysis, document review, Delphi techniques, and Monte Carlo simulation. Okay, so very first we are going to go over is a risk breakdown structure, which is a basically hierarchical representation of risk. And this is how these are organized by risk categories and subcategories. So as you can see, each of these main categories can be broken down into more specific ones, and they can be further subdivided. So some typical categories are technical risk, management risk, commercial risk, and external risk. This next we have assessing risk, qualitative, then quantitative. So initially we assess the risk to determine if it is high, low, or medium. But if we want to have a further understanding of that, we need to have a quantitative method to derive the actual percentage or maybe numbers for those risks associated to those risks. So if I give you an example of these two, so let's say there is a software development project. So the qualitative risk would be that suppose one of the risks identified is, like I mentioned earlier, a key team member is leaving during the project, which could lead to basically delay in a project. So it is just a risk. A key team member may leave during the project. So likelihood is that team member have been discussing dissatisfaction with work-life balance, and work project is expected to demand significant overtime. Based on these factors, you might assess that likelihood is high that this key team member might leave. Impact it would have on a project is that if this key team member leave, it would take time to hire and train the replacement, and some unique expertise might be lost. So you might assess the impact as high too. So the likelihood is high, impact is high, likelihood means probability is high, impact is high. So the risk level with both highly high probability and high impact, this could be considered as a high risk in a qualitative manner. But if you want to put a numbers to that, you need to do quantitative risk assessment for this. So likelihood, there is a probability, there is let's say 60% chance that this person, key team member, will leave. And impact it would have, that includes $10,000, let's say, per day for the project runs over the schedule. And it may take up to, let's say, 60 days USS to find his or her replacement. So if you do the math, 60 times 10,000 times 60%, it turns out to be 360,000. So now it gives a project manager an assessment of how much it will cost, or it would be a qualitative risk if they put that in numbers. So quantitative risk assessment help the project manager to understand the project potential financial impact of the project delays in monetary terms. Let me know if there is any question on understanding this. So this is how basically a company defines, or a organization defines, their probability and impact definition. So they may put the scale very high, high, medium, low, very low. And then for probability, if there is a chance that 70% and more that it will happen, the time it will take more than 6 months and it will cost 5 million, then this will be considered as a very high risk, very significant impact on overall functionality. Similarly, for high, 51 to 70%, for medium, 31 to 50%, and you can put your definition after having a discussion with your internal team or stakeholder, and you can develop this chart. So this is a different representation of probability and impact in a matrix form, where you can represent opportunities and threat in a common probability and impact matrix using positive definition of impact for opportunities and negative impact definition for threats. So as you can see, if the probability is low, impact is low, it's a very low chance, very low risk. But as probability increase or impact increase, that it is a very high risk. So this is our risk register. Yep. So risk registers, basically it's an information that you put in a risk register, and it contains the. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, this does not look like risk. Oh no. Yeah, sorry, I missed. So this is a risk register that has an impact description, impact level, probability level, risk score, that you get the risk score by multiplying impact and probabilities. So 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 2, 10, 3 times 3, 9. And then you have a trigger conditions, which is the condition that in what situation it may trigger, and what would be the planned response if it happens, and who is the responsible party for that risk. So this is a risk list where it's given some of the calculations, how, like, working with a new vendor and a building process, the probability is 5, impact is 6, so magnitude is 30. So risk can also, so this risk list, you can also add the owner, status, date identified, just like the risk registers. So as it says, in addition to risk list or a risk register, team use information radiator or a backlog refinement process with risk label, risks added, which are discussed at the various planning meetings. Okay, so this is also one of the method for quantitative risk analysis. So here we are discussing simulations and sensitive analysis. So simulations involves calculating several possible project durations with varying set of active assumptions. So if I just give you an example, Monte Carlo simulation is the tool that is being used here. Monte Carlo simulation produce a quantitative risk analysis model by using schedule cost inputs to produce an integrated quantitative cost schedule risk analysis. So if I give you an example, these simulations can help providing a probability distributions. So for example, it might show that there is a 95% chance the project will complete in 50 days, or it will 70% chance the project will complete in 45 days. So this analysis can provide valuable insight into the level of risk associated with the project timeline, how it changes. Next we have is a sensitive analysis. And the tool that we use here is a tornado diagram. So through this technique, the one element is changed while all other elements are held constant. So it could be that you have a time, cost. So you need to have one element that you change, keeping all other elements in the calculation constant, and then you calculate the different values. So tornado diagrams is used to typically display the results of sensitive analysis. And this is basically the name is tornado because it looks more like a tornadoes. There are right and left the bars. So and we refer to this tool and technique is just for the sensitive analysis and the simulations. Next, we have a decision tree analysis, influence diagram, and expected monetary value. So decision tree allows decisions based on both probabilities and impact, like what we discussed earlier. But in decision trees, you make a different branch. So if I give you an example, so let's say you want to launch a new product. Okay, so this is how the decision tree will work. So very first branch will have launch or not launch. So when the business first needs to decide whether to launch, not to launch, so these are the two branches. After that, maybe you can have another branch that if business decide to launch the product, then there are different scenarios like it may success. There is 60% chance that the product will successful. There is 40% chance that product will not be successful. So this is how basically you create the decision trees. And then you have the outcome node in the end. So if the product is successful, business estimate to profit 500. But if it's not successful, then estimate of losing 200K. So if business decide not to launch the product, the outcome is $0. So there are three options. So expected monetary value is something that you use to calculate that, do you still want to continue or not? So if I give you using the same example, so let's say if business decide to launch, what you would do. So because we said if business decide to launch, there are 60% chance that the business will success and business will make about 500K. So you multiply these two numbers and then you subtract. Basically, there's 40% chance that business would not make any money and there is about 200K of loss business may have to bear. So you multiply these two numbers and the value you get is about 220K. So that means that if business does not launch, decide not to launch, their EMV is 0. But if they decide to launch, they will be in profit of like 220K. So you made such analysis and then based on those, you decide that what you want to go. So in this example, as you can see, the decision tree analysis showed that launching the product has a higher EMV. So therefore it's better for them to launch this product despite the risk of loss. So it says predictive projects are most often affected by the impact of cost-related risk, whereas adaptive projects are affected by impact of time-related risk. And so it is just a question for you all. Do you think each of these typical risk is more typical of predictive or adaptive project? And can you explain why? Would any of you want to take this very first one, delivery date slip? What do you think? Anybody want to answer this?
I would say predictive, because you're planning everything at the very front end. You're not doing the sprints where you have a little more of a finite time and you've planned your iterations more
Mhm.
succinctly. So I would say, in that case, the delivery date slippage would be more likely to happen, I guess, in predictive.
Okay, good. And what about stretch resources?
I would almost say the same thing, again, because you're not planning in the shorter iterations. And if you're doing all your planning upfront, and maybe your date slipped and this whole thing starts to become a snowball effect. So I would say stretch resources would also be a predictive problem.
Okay. Anybody else want to take lack of clarity? From your experience, where you have experienced that lack of clarity is associated with predictive or adaptive? There's nothing right and wrong in here. It's just about the understanding, okay, how you take this, Anybody? Maybe you can believe. Do you want to take the same answer too? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
It's Elizabeth.
Hey, Elizabeth.
And I think lack of clarity could happen in any case, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
same with scope creep, again, you're defining everything up front. I don't know. Honestly, I could see the other two happening in both situations,
That is true.
upfront or iteration,
All right.
because people are always trying to throw stuff into a project that wasn't originally
Planned
expected.
for. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
So if we were to get that question on the test, what would the answers be? Or would we get a question like that?
I think your questions when I took this exam was more situational. So they put you in a situation, they give you the
Okay.
specific situations. Yeah. Second. So these are the risk response. Risk response should have appropriate for significance of risk, cost effective. It should be realistic within the project context, agreed to by relevant stakeholders or owned by a responsible person. So these are the guidelines for the planned risk responses and terminologies. So again want to start with some kind of an examples to explain all these terminologies. So I'll start with the trigger condition. So let's say we consider a construction project where there is a risk of delay due to bad weather. So here is how we will play out all the terms. So the trigger would be the weather forecast predicts a storm in the area where construction is taking place. So this trigger condition signals the risk of project delay due to bad weather. So that is our trigger. And team implements a risk response could be that the project team decides to work extra hours or ahead of time, ahead of the storm to try and stay on schedule. So this is a risk mitigation strategy to reduce the impact of potential delay. Next, we have as a secondary risk. So the secondary risk would be that extra hours puts a stress on the workers and it increases the risk of accident. So secondary risk that arises as a result of risk response. So you might be put into a situation, something like this, the example that I'm giving, that what would be the secondary risk? Secondary risk is that, extra hours that customers are putting in and there could be chances of risk accident at the site. Residual risk would be like even after working extra hours, there are still risks that storm could last longer and that could cause a delay. So this is a residual risk that remains even after the risk response has been implemented. And contingency plan is a backup plan. The project manager has a contingency plan to hire maybe additional workers after the storm to catch up on the lost time if necessary. And the contingency reserve would be that the project includes a contingency reserve of $10,000 that can be used to cover the cost of the extra workers. So these are the examples that I shared. Most of the time, questions are also asked in those terms by putting you in a situation that this is a situation. What do you think? What's happening there? Okay, so this is the risk response strategies. So we prepare strategies for the threats, for the and as well as for the opportunities. And how do we handle threats and opportunities? So let's say when there is a threat, how do we escalate? So I will again explain this using an example. So let's say a project is working on developing a new software solution, but they encounter a complex technical issues that their team does not have an expertise. So what would you do? So you escalate this to the high level management or maybe more specialized team. So when the threat response strategy is escalate, avoid. So let's say if business is considering a new market, but the research indicates that a highly likelihood that competitive response could be severely impacting the profitability. So in that case, you avoid that project. So to avoid this risk, maybe you decide not to enter the market or focus their resources on less risky opportunities. How you transfer response would be, let's say, even planning companies organizing an outdoor festival, but there is a risk of severe weather disrupting the event. So to transfer that risk, you purchase an insurance policies that cover the loss in the event of weather related issues happen. So in this case, you're transferring the risk to the insurance policies. Mitigate. So let's say a manufacturer relies heavily on single supplier for the raw material. It creates a risk on a supplier failure. What if they are not able to supply? So to mitigate this risk, you or the project managers identify the alternative suppliers and they develop a relationship with them, ensuring that they can switch to that supplier if necessary. So that's how you mitigate the risk. And how you accept the risk is, let's say a small business is launching a new product and that they recognize that there is a risk that their product may not be able to sell as expected. So they decide to still accept that risk and move forward with that. So when there is an opportunity, how one needs to develop an opportunity response strategies. So in that case, your escalate definition would be, so let's say a project team identifies an opportunity that could greatly benefit the project, but it's outside their scope. So what they do is, so let's say they could identify a potential partnership with another company that they could accelerate the project completion, but it requires a high executive levels negotiation. So that's how you escalate to the higher level because there is an opportunity there. And how do you exploit? So let's say a software company discovers that there is a high demand for a certain type of app that has a very few competitors in a market. So they decide to exploit this opportunity by relocating resources and prioritizing the development to this app to exploit the opportunity. Share, if I give you the share, let's say a startup identifies a large untapped market, but they lack the resources to fully exploit the opportunity on their own. So decide to share the opportunity with another company through a joint venture. Next is an enhance. So in enhance, let's say a restaurant owner identifies that many customers are asking for a vegan options. So that indicates a potential opportunity for the restaurant. So they decide to enhance this opportunity by not just adding probably few vegan dishes, but by revamping the entire menu to the vegan friendly. accepting the opportunity is like, let's say, e-commerce business noticed that a particular product is not selling more than more than their expectations during holiday season. So they accept this opportunity passively without making any immediate change. But this and decide to basically monitor the sales closely. And if trend continues, they may decide to stock more of these products of in future or maybe reduce it, but they accept it for that period. Okay, so that's how we conclude risk. Next topic we have is a quality. Let me know if there are any questions on a risk that you want to discuss. If any of you want to discuss. If not, we'll move forward with quality. So quality represents what a stakeholder expects from a project. Like in today's customer pocket business, end user happiness is more critical to defining the quality. So quality is basically a condition governed by internal quality policies as well as external policies such as commercial standards and regulations. We have a cost of quality here defined. So cost of quality is basically a reliable way of thinking through the monetary value of quality in your product. So in project management professionals, they refer this to as like total cost incurred to ensure that the quality in all stages of the project. So this includes all the expenses associated with preventing poor quality, identifying issues, correcting project defect. COQ is a mean to quantify the total cost of quality related efforts and deficiencies. So we have like two kind of cost of qualities, cost of conformance and cost of non-conformance. Cost of conformance are the costs that incur to ensure project is done right the very first time. They include cost for quality planning, training, inspections, audits, and implementing the systems. And they can be further subdivided into two: prevention cost and appraisal cost. Prevention costs are the costs that incur to prevent defects from occurring. So what one can do is they can train their employees, they can document the processes, and they set documents right. Appraisal cost is that cost that incurs to assess the quality of projects deliverables, such as testing, destructive testing loss, inspections. So those are like once your product is ready, you spend more money, you spend the cost money on the testing the deliverables. The cost of non-conformance are the costs that incur when the project's results fail to meet the quality standards. So cost of conformance is to avoid such cost, and cost of non-conformance is the cost that incur after the project has failed the quality standards. So this include the cost for rework, scrap, warranty claims, and loss of reputations. So this can be also further subdivided into two: internal failure cost or external failure cost. Internal failure costs are the costs that are associated with defects found in the customer's, excuse me, defects that's found before the customer received the product or the service. So your team does the rework and the scrap and all those things. External failure costs are the costs that relates to the defects that are found by the customers. The customer received the product and after that they found those defects, and those are like repairs, warranty claims, returns, loss of reputations. So the goal of understanding COQ is to measure the investment in preventions and appraisal against the cost of failure. So by understanding this cost, organization can determine the investment level in quality that allow total cost to be as low as possible. So it depends, right, where you want to spend their fundings. Stakeholder and customer expectations of quality. So product deliverables identifies the quality requirements during requirements elicitation to create quality management plan, and the processes are ongoing observations and checking of process stated in quality management plan, overseen by quality policy. So your organization should have a quality policy which applies to all the projects. And if your organization does not have a quality policy, then your project needs to create one. Quality project plan. So the quality management in a project is an aspect to basically to ensure that final deliverables meets the desired standards and provides the expected value to the stakeholders. So it includes activities and resources that achieve the quality objective. So let's say you are managing a project to build a new software application. And the quality objective might include 0 critical bugs at launch. It should be a user-friendly interface, and the response time should be under 2 minutes, 2 seconds, maybe, or 2 minutes, anything. So activities to achieve these objectives could include thorough testing procedures, user experience design sessions, performance optimization activities, or resources might involve a dedicated quality assurance team, user experience experts, or a high performance servers for testing. Or it involves like formal or informal, detailed or broadly framed. So these quality activities and resources could be formally defined. For example, in a project quality management plan with detailed checklist and procedures. They could be more like informal, like sharing understanding within the team that all code needs to be reviewed by a second developer before it is integrated. All those things need to be taken care, or maybe reviewed throughout the project. Throughout the project, maybe one would need to regularly review these quality activities and resources. You might hold a weekly meetings to discuss any bugs found, what caused them, and how they were resolved. The benefits we have is a sharper focus on project value propositions. So by ensuring that the software application is user-friendly, fast, and bug-free, you are delivering on the project value proposition, which might be to provide a seamless and efficient tool for customers, cost reduction, of course, by catching the fixes and by catching and fixing the bug early in the development process. You can avoid higher cost that could be incurred if the bugs are found later in a stage. Mitigate the schedule overruns from the rework. So by investing in a quality upfront, for example, through code reviews or user experience design session, one can avoid schedule delays that would occur if one had to significantly rework later in the stage. Next we have here is a compliance requirements. Compliance applies to all projects using any life cycle or in any industries. Compliance requirements are often associated with legal or regulatory standards. So project may be compliant with internal or external standards such as appropriate government regulations, organizational policies, product and project quality requirements, project risk, or so in order to manage the compliance needed for a project, you need to take these extra steps, which is like classify the compliance categories, determine the potential threat to compliance, analyze the consequences of non-compliance, and determine the necessary approach and actions to address those compliance needs. Okay, so here we have Of course, the quality standards needs to be met and managed throughout the project. So we have a definition for standards and the regulations. Standard is a document that is established by an authority. And it could be a general concept as a model for an example. Let's say standards are typically voluntarily guidelines or characteristics that have been approved by maybe a recognized body or decided by your organizations. Regulations are the requirements that are imposed by the government bodies, and these requirements can establish product process, service characteristics, and in like applicable administrative provisions that have government's mandate compliance. So this slide is for the discussions. What do you think? What standards and regulations are relevant in your industry? Would anybody give an example of standard and regulations? I know we all are in telecom industry, but can you guys just give one example? Anyone would have an example?
Well, I mean, I do deployments for AT&T managed services, and we have to follow customer change control. And by that change control, it's not project management change control, but IT change environment change control process. And that's a hard and steady regulation that we have to follow.
Okay. So do you consider that as a standard or a regulations?
Well, it'd be a standard really, but it is a customer rule. I mean, it's not a government regulation, but it is.
This is regulated by the customer. Okay.
There are consequences for not following it.
Okay. Yeah. So makes sense. Thank you. So next we have is a quality metrics, checklists, and processes. Metrics measure the desired quality attributes for your product or project through testing, use of tools and processes. It includes a tolerance level that factor in what customer will accept and describe the desired quality level. In the acceptance criteria and duty include checklists, templates, quality artifacts, and quality management plan. I'm gonna go over those. Okay.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to see the adaptive team part.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because adaptive teams use the retrospective and small batches cycle to ensure the quality because they do the work in batches, right? In sprints. Yes. So these are the quality methods for continuous improvement. I'm sure most of us must have heard about Six Sigma, Kaizen, Plan, Do, Check, Act, and Agile. So Sigma, this is a data-driven quality strategies used to improve processes. And its acronym for the first phases that make up like DMAIC. D is a define, identify the problem. M is a measure, quantify the problem. And A is a analyze, identify the cause of the problem. I is an improve, implement, and test solution. And the control is maintain the solution. So just to give an example, let's say call center uses Six Sigma to reduce the average call duration, and they don't want to compromise the service quality. So they would define the problem as long call duration, and they will measure the current call duration. They will analyze the call data to identify the inefficiencies. And from in improve bucket would be the process by implementing new strategies like script revisions, and control by monitoring the results and adjusting as necessary. Next, we have a Kaizen. This is a Japanese philosophy that focuses on continuous improvement in all aspects of life. So in business, it's about like making small incremental changes for better. So if I give you an example, is a, let's say, manufacturing company might implement the Kaizen by encouraging all the employees to suggest any small improvement to their work process. This could be anything, let's say maybe as small as rearranging the tools for better efficiency to basically reduce the waste or the time. Plan, do, check as this is a iterative 4-step management method, which is used to control and for the continuous improvement of processes and products. So in this example, if I give you, let's say, a restaurant trying to reduce the food waste, they use the PDCA cycle. So they plan to identify potential area of waste. That's their plan. They do by implementing the solution, like better inventory management. Check would be monitoring the food waste level after implementation. And then they act by adjusting their solution based on the result. Next we have is an agile methods, and these type of project managements are often used like in a software development. They involve breaking down the project into small manageable pieces, sprints basically, and regularly reassessing and adjusting the project goals. Scrum is a framework within Agile that is used to manage and control complex software and product development. Team works in sprint, basically typically 2 to 4 weeks to complete their set amount of work. Kanban is basically a visual of seeing basically visual system for managing the work. It moves through a process. The work items are visualized in Kanban. It allows the team members to see the status of every piece of the work. Okay, where they are, how far away are they. Crystal method is more of a family of software development methodologies that focus on people, interactions, communities, skills, talents, and all those things. Okay, so we conclude quality. Let me know if anyone has any question on quality. So integrating plan is an important step. It includes like overall the scope, schedule, budget, resources, quality, and risk plans must support desired outcome. These steps coordinate and evaluate all plans and activities that will be used throughout the projects. No matter the life cycle, the plan needs to come together somehow and inform the work. And this is an important steps in thought and practice that all project practitioners needs to do. So basically at the end of the planning stage, we combine all the planning results from the knowledge area. And we reframe the approach to plan integration and figure out a way forward to work with the various planning elements. We adapt it while working, and adaptive process and agile ceremonies provide a structure to continuously integrate plans or aspects of project. Okay, change control. So we use change management plan to set a process and assign role for the change. So change management plan is a document that outlines the approaches, procedures, and activities needed to manage any change that may occur during the life cycle of the project. So change could be related to a scope, timeline, budget, resources, or it could be anything. So this is an example. Let's say, so it says question about change. So you design your plan that who can propose a change. So those roles are assigned. What exactly constitute a change? So a change is a proposed or an event change one of the project baseline or measures. So once somebody has baselined the document, what if change needs to add to that, then you submit a change request. What is the impact of change on a project objective? What are the steps to evaluate a change request before approving and rejecting? So you have your whole plan in here that how the changes will be handled. So this is about the plan for complexity and a change. So complexity within a project is a result could happen because of organization system, human behavior, uncertainty, or any kind of ambiguities. So team needs to create a way to work in a complex environment. So here are some useful suggestions. The very first one is a system based, and the system based could be decoupling or simulations. So decoupling is that one can disconnect the parts of the system to simplify it and reduce the number of connected variable, just to see, okay, once you decouple this part, how it works. There could be a simulations where you use the similar unrelated scenarios to try to understand the complexity. One can reframe the problem. So let's say if team is struggling with a high cart abandonment rate, they might reframe the problem from how do we reduce the cart abandonment to how we make the checkout process more engaging and easy for customers. So diversity is viewing the system from different perspective. So you can they could use a Delphi-like process where you gather the anonymous feedback from experts to narrow down their ideas. Balance is when you compare, let's say I'll give you an example, different website design. You are designing a website and then you compare the outcome of the different website just to see what works best. And so that's how you balance the forecasting future trend. Next we have is a process based. So let's say your website design process is too linear and they don't adapt changes. So in that case, you may switch to an iterative process where you release the minimal viable product first and then make the improvement based on the user feedback. If the project is really complex, iterate is, of course, plan iteratively and incrementally. Engage is you engage with your stakeholders, and fail safe is plan for failures. So these are some of the plans to handle the complex projects. This is how to approach complex plan, fail fast and self-correct. So sometimes problems seems to be so complex that one feel impossible to plan. So let me just give you an example. I will just explain that how to work with those complex is with an example. So let's say tech startup company is developing a complex AI system. So at the beginning, you find that AI project seems overwhelming complex due to numerous variables involved, such as data collection, algorithms, testing, implementations. So how you reframe through the mindset of failing fast and self-correction. So instead of trying to plan out the entire project in detail from the start, the team could adopt fail fast mindset. That means they can develop a minimum viable product, and then they test it and see what works and what doesn't work. So this allows the team to learn from the failure quickly and make the necessary changes and the corrections. So let's say if the AI system isn't performing well with the initial algorithm, the team would not spend their time, to perfect it, fix all the issues. They would rather quickly identify the failure and learn from it and pivot to the different approach. Another approach is tailoring, adaptability, and resiliency. So team can prioritize their collaborations over rigid instructions, where rather having rigid instructions and control, they can foster a culture that encourage innovations and flexibility. Just to give you an example, so if they have an AI system performs better with certain type of data, so and they can quickly adapt their data collections process to focus on that data type. So the resilience and adaptability can help them navigate the project complexity more effectively rather than being sticking to the same instructions and the control. And also, of course, starting with the project management plan. So despite the complexity, it's always important to start with the project management plan, because the plan might be more high level and flexible compared to traditional project plan, but it would still outline the project's objectives, the stakeholders, and the product strategies. I guess that's when we conclude. Yep. Okay, so we finish our lesson on risk, quality, and integrate plan. Let me know if any of you have any question on any of the topics. I take this note. So I guess we can adjourn our meeting and I will stop sharing. Thanks everyone for joining this class.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.